Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I want to thank Sue for inviting me to be a guest minister this morning, and I'm really happy to be here sharing a Sunday talk. And I'd like to segue into my talk on spiritual healing, self-transformation through life's losses with a short story. A Colorado couple decided to go to Southern California to have a break from a cold, snowy winter. Yet because of varied schedules, they were not able to fly out together on the same day. So the husband left Colorado and flew to San Diego on Friday, and his wife was scheduled to fly down the following day on Saturday. Upon his arrival, the husband checked into the hotel. And seeing a computer in the room, he decided to email his wife. However, he accidentally left out one letter in her email address, and without realizing it, he sent the email. Meanwhile, somewhere in Oregon, a widow had just returned home from her husband's funeral. She decided to check her mail, expecting messages from relatives and friends. Yet after reading the first email message, she screamed and fainted. The widow's son rushed into the room, found her on the floor, and looked at the computer screen, which read, "To my wife, I've arrived. I know you're surprised to hear from me. I've just arrived and they checked me in. They have computers here now, and you're allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've made sure that everything is all set for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. P.S. Sure is hot down here." Well, our consciousness really is amazing, and as synchronicity would have it, as I began writing my talk on spiritual healing, a memory surfaced at the speed of light that moved me into my sole purpose in the field of spiritual healing. And this was a loss experience. And in that moment, my knowing was so profound, even though I had realized for years that this loss had sort of steered me into the field of healing. And I realized, too, that had it not been for that loss, I may not have followed a path that led me here to be sharing the Sunday talk with you. And so I want to share from my loss experiences that everything has a meaning and purpose. And Ecclesiastes 3:1 agrees. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. Did you know that there are over 43 known losses for which a person may feel grief? That's a lot. And yes, grief is not solely attributed to loss by death. So who among you has ever moved? Anybody ever moved? Moving is one of the most neglected loss experiences in our society. Who among you has ever changed jobs? Or had a health challenge that altered your life for a while? Yeah. Who's experienced the end of a significant relationship or divorce? And then there are intangible losses. Who has ever lost faith or trust in someone or something? Right? Or have you ever lost a dream? Yeah, challenging. Well, we all experience loss. And while change is inevitable and change itself is often positive, our conflicting feelings about the change cause grief. So what exactly is grief? Well, grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Grief is a natural and normal response to loss. And in and of itself, it's not a pathological condition and it's not a personality disorder. When a person is grieving, their heart is broken, not their head. And approaching grief naturally has the best long-term outcome for everyone. Yet, in our society, grief is often intellectualized. And so most individuals learn at a very early age to bury their pain rather than to feel it and express it. And when pain is buried, it will find an outlet. We can be sure of that. Just look at all the illness in the United States. Underlying many illnesses, we will find unresolved, buried grief. Unresolved grief consumes massive amounts of energy, drawing it from your cellular tissues. And mostly, grief stays buried under the surface and only symptoms are treated. This is why we call it unresolved. And since the 1950s, psycho-oncology research, meaning the psychology of cancer, research has shown that a primary precursor to cancer is a significant emotional loss dating up to 10 years prior to the cancer diagnosis. And new research in cardioenergetics has demonstrated that the physical heart actually tears during heartbreak. Yes, so a broken heart is not simply a metaphor, it's a physical event. And so when you think of cancer and heart disease as one of the two leading causes of illness, or two leading illnesses in our society, and you relate grief to that, it starts to make a lot of sense. And where there's buried grief, there's emotional incompleteness. As John James, founder of the Grief Recovery Institute, notes, over time, the pain of unresolved grief is cumulative and cumulatively negative. Whether caused by a death, divorce, or other type of loss, incomplete recovery from grief can have a lasting, lifelong negative impact on a person's capacity for happiness. Well, then, what is emotional incompleteness? Even in the best of relationships and life experiences, there are unfinished emotions. Things we wish we had said or done, or things we didn't say or do, or things we wished had been different, better, or more. And herein lies unresolved grief, as unresolved grief is about undelivered emotional communications that accrue within a relationship over time. Emmett Miller, MD, pioneering physician in mind-body medicine, states, even when you are dissociated from an emotion, it continues to operate below the level of consciousness. It has an impact on your life, often more of an impact than it would if you could freely feel it and express it. It will determine what attracts you and what repels you, and it will be a prime, albeit unconscious factor in your decision-making. The Buddhists call emotional incompleteness samskaras, threads or skeins of emotion left undone that stay with the soul until the time the soul decides to finish what is needed to be finished. In Buddhist thought, this is the basis for karma, for unfinished patterns that we carry forward from previous lives into the present time to be emotionally finished and healed. Michael Singer, author of The Untethered Soul, remarks, when you willfully struggle to keep events from passing through your consciousness, the energy eventually gets forced into deep storage in your heart. In the yogic tradition, that unfinished energy pattern is called a samskara. This is a Sanskrit word meaning impression. And in yogic teachings, it is considered one of the most important influences affecting your life. A samskara is a blockage, an impression from the past. It's an unfinished energy pattern that ends up running your life. So in other words, consciousness does not forget what is asking to be emotionally finished and completed. Now, isn't that amazing? It remembers over time, over the eons, what needs to be completed. So let's talk a little more fully now about the intellectualization of loss. So how is it that in our society and even our religions we've intellectualized loss? Well, mainly through the many myths that we pass down from generation to generation. So let's look at several of these myths, and I imagine that you will be able to identify with one, if not all of them. So the first one I'll share is the myth, don't feel bad. I'm sure we've all heard that one. And when we tell someone not to feel bad, we are telling them to deny their feelings. Especially young children. We're creating a conflict with their inner knowing and the natural expression of their feelings. And just think of how for generations we socialize little boys, right? They're not supposed to do what? Cry, right? So that means they're supposed to bury their feelings, so they learn pretty early on, right? So another myth, replace the loss. This is the number one myth that has perpetuated more divorce than any other myth. Because if someone's heart is not healed from a loss, a new partner or a new spouse, no matter how attractive or how loving, will not replace the loss of that relationship. First and foremost, healing grief must happen, and then when the heart's ready, it accepts the new. All right, another myth, just give it time. Ooh, a major myth, right? Time heals. Does it really heal? Nah, that's just a myth. Time doesn't heal. Time alone, We all know people that have had losses 10, 20, or more than 20 years ago that still haven't healed. You might be one of them. I was one for a while, right? Who had a loss that was years ago that hadn't quite healed. Anyway, time alone doesn't heal. The truth is that only correct actions will help us go and lead us to healing. Okay, another myth, be strong for others. This myth tells us to bury our pain and pretend it isn't there. Be strong for others, so I'm going to pretend like I don't feel my pain. And of course, this creates unconscious patterns, and it could also create possible illness. And the last one I'll share, which there are others, keep busy. Meaning distract yourself from your feelings, right? Busy, 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 which of course is a form of self-sabotage. So out of these myths come some common intellectual cliches about loss, like get a hold of yourself, or you can't fall apart, or it was meant to be, or he, she, it wasn't right for you anyway. Right? We've all heard these. So what these myths and cliches imply is don't feel your feelings and pretend, first of all, pretend you don't even have the feelings. So this is pretty unhealthy and dangerous advice for us. Another aspect of the intellectualization of loss in our society and around the world is that human beings have a tendency to compare and minimize losses, meaning that they label and judge people's losses. No one's loss is any more important or less important than someone else's loss. Every loss is experienced 100% by a griever, and this is because the truth is that every person and every relationship is unique, and so all loss experiences are unique. And so instead of helping a griever feel better, someone who is in the midst of sorrow may feel alienated from people who use intellectual statements in replying to their loss. This is because, again, intellectual statements are up here, which of course a lot of our society is up here, And someone who's grieving a loss is in here, in their heart, and wants to be heard from their heart. And interestingly, the more intellectual the response to loss and pain, even by well-intentioned family and friends, the more grievers tend to isolate themselves, which just adds to their difficult and challenging experience. But really, the truth is that with correct information and correct choices, a person can recover from any significant loss. That's the truth. So let's go back to the massive amounts of energy created by change. That energy needs to go somewhere, and individuals send energy to various behaviors, depending on how little or how much resistance they have to feeling pain. For example, after a loss, some people begin drinking. Some people begin using drugs, both pharmaceutical and illicit. Or we all know someone who shops all the time, or spends inordinate amounts of time on the internet or in front of a television, or who eats too much or eats too little. Or then we know people who work all the time, right? Working day and night, just busy, busy, busy. All in an attempt to distract themselves from the reality of their feelings. And any of these behaviors engaged in for the wrong reasons or taken to an extreme can have a negative impact on a person's quality of life. And over time, energy directed in unhealthy ways becomes life-limiting. And it further reduces our aliveness. And of course, reduced aliveness is a sign of unresolved grief. So let's talk about depression for a minute. Depression is very much associated with grief in our society. Yet, as John James notes, and in a typical Western medical approach, many people have been conditioned to seek a medical solution to grief, which is a non-medical problem. This can be dangerous. Treatment of grief in the form of psychotropic drugs can hide the normal and natural reactions to loss. Once buried, it is difficult to reconnect to those feelings at a later date. And yet, as we all know, these feelings are still very much alive within our body, our mind, and our spirit. The great Persian mystic Rumi once said, "Where there is ruin, there's a chance to find treasure." When I first read Rumi's quote, wow, it took me a long time to figure out what he meant. Where there is ruin, there's a chance to find treasure. How could that be? Yet, as I finally figured it out, I believe it's absolutely true. That healing always brings us to unimaginable treasures, especially when we see our human life through our spiritual eyes. And so in looking at loss through our spiritual eyes, we will see that, as in the Chinese philosophy, loss is both a crisis and an opportunity. And this is where spiritual healing comes in. To heal means to make sound or whole. And spiritual healing is making whole by simply noting that it is our spirit and the Great Spirit that are first and foremost the primary guides along our healing path. Spiritual healing is seeing every experience with our spiritual eyes. It's realizing the gift of self-transformation inherent in life experiences. It is embracing a Christ-like consciousness in the understanding of life's events. spiritual healing invites us to embark on a journey for a search for meaning. And while on this journey, to cultivate qualities such as forgiveness, compassion, and trust. Spiritual healing is also about faith in knowing beyond a doubt that there are higher reasons for our life experiences. And it's a willingness to align our spirit with the Great Spirit through accepting what is, assigning meaning to our experience, and embracing a greater intimacy with God. And so it turns out, incredibly enough, that the gates of sorrow are a spiritual gift, inviting us on a journey of self-transformation, beckoning us to rise above difficult life events and emotions. And interestingly, it is precisely feelings of sorrow and grief that are known to be significant catalysts to what is considered classical mystical experience, meaning a felt sense of the presence of God, which in turn is also a catalyst to self-transformation. Viktor Frankl, famous Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, whose consummate life work is based on the belief that meaning may be found in the most devastating of life experiences, notes, people forget that often it is just such an exceptionally difficult situation that gives human beings the opportunity to grow spiritually beyond the self. And so as an aside, I want to share a little story that will lead us into looking at self-transformation. A man and his ever-nagging wife went to Jerusalem for a vacation. While they were there, the wife passed away. The undertaker told the husband, "You can have her shipped home for $5,000, or you can bury her here in the Holy Land for $150. The man thought about it and told him he would just have to have her shipped home. The undertaker asked, "Well, why would you spend $5,000 to ship your wife home when it would be wonderful to have her buried here and you would spend only $150? The man replied, "Long ago, a man died here, was buried here, and 3 days later, he arose from the dead. I just can't take that chance." This cute story really leads to how the story of Jesus, his life, his crucifixion and resurrection, are a metaphor for the gift of self-transformation and spiritual transformation inherent in loss. And so let's look at what several of the well-known mystics have to say about this. Christian mystic St. John of the Cross described the path of self-transformation in the term the dark night of the soul, which is known to lead to a greater alignment and intimacy with God. American mythologist Joseph Campbell said, "It's by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. When you stumble, therein lies your treasure." Jack Kornfield, Buddhist monk and leading Buddhist teacher in America, reiterates, "The most frequent entryway into the sacred is our own suffering and dissatisfaction." And His Holiness the Dalai Lama agrees. Suffering is the first step to enlightenment. Even Unity's Catherine Ponder has something to say about this. When you feel in control of desolate circumstances, you are able to gain the blessing from them so that those challenges no longer control you. Stop dwelling on apparent losses in your life and start looking for the growth and gain that come from them. For every loss, there is a gain. So drop the loss and take the gain. And so Rumi's mystical friends agree. Where there is ruin, there is a chance to find treasure. And so, in spiritually healing from life's losses, I would like to leave you with several salient thoughts. Know how to see life through your spiritual eyes. Feel your feelings. Welcome them as messengers on an important mission for your highest and best. Recognize that life's losses inherently contain spiritual gifts. From Michael Singer in The Untethered Soul, remember, nothing ever is worth closing your heart over. And quite importantly, as our mystical friends remind us, know love as the true reality and the greatest healing force in the universe. And so it is. Amen.